most successful diplomacy is the one that prevents the crisis you never hear about. Colin Powell, the 65th US Secretary of State. That all might be very well, but what about public praise, recognition, appreciation? What's the appeal of a job where the biggest achievements have to stay secret? We're about to find out, as today we dive into the critically acclaimed political thriller, The Diplomat. The Diplomat is a Netflix series about an American diplomat, Kate Weiler, played by the incomparable Kerry Russell, who navigates one global crisis after another. The crises may be fictional, but they're uncomfortably familiar as they closely mirror today's political tensions. Things get even more complicated because Kate is accompanied by her husband, Hal, who is rising through the same diplomatic ranks. Although both spouses work in service of the same country, they could not go about it in more different ways. Since its release in 2023, The Diplomat has been nominated for 55 awards in total, including 7 Golden Globes and 3 Primetime Emmys. Recently, the series has won the American Film Institute Television Program of the Year award for providing a complex, rich visual record of our modern world. To take a closer look at how accurate this record is, I'm joined by a husband and wife who, much like the characters in the award-winning series, spent the better part of their careers in the U.S. diplomatic service. Nina and Sean Murray. Hello, Nina.
Hello, Aiste.
And hello, Sean.
Hey, Aiste.
Thank you both for joining me. I should probably lead by saying that I met Nina when she was the cultural attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Vilnius, Lithuania. And that's how I came to know Sean as well. If you could remind me, when was it exactly when you were posted on from Lithuania?
It was summer of 2014, actually probably late May 2014.
Yeah. So it's been quite a while. I'm very grateful to the series that it provided me with the opportunity to reconnect with you both. And I really want to bring the series right into the conversation from the very beginnings. We'll be talking today about season 3. And in season 3, we learn a little bit about how the main characters, Kate and Hal, met. So we find out that they were both posted to Iraq. At that point, Hal was the U.S. ambassador. Kate was his subordinate, so they were keeping their relationship secret. But then unexpectedly, Hal was reassigned to Austria. Kate immediately asked to be transferred to Vienna together with him, but he didn't want that. So now I would like us to take a moment to listen to what Kate had to say about it.
Is this a fling?
No.
Is this what you do? Are you fucking me because you go from post to post, teaching the young and idealistic how to fight for democracy by schooling them with your magic penis?
Jesus Christ.
Yes or no?
No.
If you're done, say it. Say, sweetheart, this was fun, but I'm done and I want to move on.
That's not what I want, Kate.
What do you want? It's not rocket science, okay? We would be a tandem couple like everyone else in the fucking service. I would stamp visas so no one knows I'm actually working for the Iran team, which could use some new blood. They just got lapped by a computer virus. You would get 3 years. I would get 3 years. We'd go where you had a great job. We'd go where I had a great job. Simplest math problem in the world. If you don't want it, have the ballsack to say you don't want it.
Tandem couples. Is it really a common thing in the diplomatic service, tandem couples?
It is, for a variety of reasons. If you try to find out statistics, the best number you will find is 15% of the service, 15. However, that's not really accurate, and the actual number is higher. Part of it is that people do come in married with 2 careers, or they get married in the service and they do what Kate and Hal are trying to do, meaning stay together while one of you gets assigned somewhere and you're trying to still be in the same neighborhood, at least neighborhood. We can comment on how realistic Kate's expectation is that she can just drop her assignment in Baghdad and just magically appear in Vienna, regardless of her willing. No way. Like that's not going to happen.
Well, if I could, I think it could happen, but after 8 months of bureaucratic fighting. right? You can't just say, oh, I'm going to hop on a plane. You can make it happen, but it's a like like everything else in the State Department, everything else in the Foreign Service, it's a fight. It's going to be a fight. And so she would have to go through that.
I suppose for aesthetic purposes of compression, we didn't want her to explain all this, but she would probably have to finish her assignment in Baghdad and then go through the process of bidding, what we call it, on the next assignment, and hoping that there is a spot in Vienna where she could go. Maybe, maybe not. She might take a job underneath her, like lower than her rank. She might have to go to the consular section where, just to set the record straight, she would not be stamping visas unless she was canceling them. She'd be adjudicating visas. But again, this would be a process that is several months long. And one of the reasons that, if I may go ahead and go into the territory of why we left the Foreign Service, was the difficulty of getting assigned in the same place at the same time. Our first tandem assignment, our first assignment as an actual couple, ended up being me to Moscow and Sean to Ciudad Juarez on the Mexican border.
That's far apart, isn't it?
Yeah, to explain that's so what happened, and the way we know about this is Nina had her assignment to Moscow. We were in Toronto at the time. And I got assigned to the Mexican border, and we ended up in a months-long bureaucratic fight about that. So the way we eventually won the fight is that we agreed to have Nina break her assignment to Moscow and come with me to Ciudad Juarez. Got Embassy Moscow then to pay attention and say, wait a minute, why is this great officer breaking her assignment to Moscow? Well, it's because her husband got assigned somewhere else. And they said, that's ridiculous. We have a spot for him here. So we essentially got Embassy Moscow to fight for us. And Embassy Moscow still carries some weight in the department. They won the bureaucratic fight for us, and we both got to go to Moscow. But that took...
It was 100 days.
Yeah, that took more than 3 months of fighting. That's how these things go in the service for tandems. Now, it might have been a little bit different in the case of Hal and Kate, in as much as, so one of the things that's never clarified in the show is whether Hal himself was a career Foreign Service officer or whether he was a political appointee. And so it's not clear to me. He sort of behaves as if he got appointed to be an ambassador from a different career. He didn't spend his entire career in the Foreign Service. He has extraordinarily high level access to President Rayburn. And so that's the kind of operator who might be able to make things happen faster than poor little us in our second and third tours fighting to get assigned to the same place. So that dynamic could be a little different in their case.
Mm-hmm. So the way it's depicted in the show, Hal and Kate, they meet already when they're in the embassy in Baghdad. What's your story? Were you both in the Foreign Service when you met?
No, we came in married and count ourselves very fortunate. In fact, we had been married for how many years?
Like 8-9 years already.
I don't remember.
I like that Nina is the one asking it.
Yeah,
How many years?
8 years? Something like
that. So we felt like we had some experience being a couple when we came in. It's been great. Like I do not envy people who go into Foreign Service single.
Oh my God. It would be extraordinarily difficult in my opinion. I mean, plenty of people do it, but there's just so much logistical, bureaucratic sort of headache work that you have to keep track of when you're in the Foreign Service lifestyle of moving every 2 years around the world, that I don't know how people do it single. I don't know how people do it with kids. It's very, very challenging.
And I want to point out that on the show, quite rightly, Hal and Katie don't have kids.
Did Sean, seeing your excellent and exciting work, Nina, get so enticed by it that he decided to go and enter the Foreign Service himself? That's how it happened?
Yeah. I will say that, like, if you are a spouse in the Foreign Service, and if you have any kind of professional background and any kind of interest at all in what's happening in your spouse's career and what the State Department does, the gravitational pull of joining the service is just incredibly strong. It's incredibly strong because otherwise, what are you doing? You're just traveling from city to city and doing very little. Maybe you can have a job where you work remotely. I think that's probably more and more common now, certainly than it was when we joined 15 years ago. But there's just this, you almost start to think like, gosh, why wouldn't I just join the service also?
Because the inside of the service is still built for a 1950s nuclear family. And one of Sean's first experiences at Post was being invited to the spouse's, what was it, tea or lunch?
Yeah, a lunch, I think, a spouse's lunch.
Spouse's lunch. And everybody else there was mothers with small children or something like that. And I don't think he went. So it's not very well, it's not built, again, was the same issue as the tandems. It's not built to accommodate two professional careers. It's not great at incorporating professional spouses. So when we say gravitational pull, absolutely the attraction of the job is there. It's one of the most interesting jobs in the world. But there's also a push because you're not necessarily gainfully employed and entirely occupied, and nobody wants a bored spouse at home when you go home.
And at some point you think to yourself, what else am I going to do other than try to join the service? Because, how else am I going to build a career?
But that's fascinating because that probably explains why we don't see any spouses of Kate and Hal's colleagues in the show. Because, it's probably would make for a very boring TV because these are people who go to luncheons and then only at the very end of season 3, we see spouses of the ambassadors and the president, when they're sharing dinner. But that's the only time, we more often see actually two employees or two foreign service officers trying to create a relationship, if they're single. Yeah. But we do not see any relationships at home outside of the embassy or, the White House. But coming back to Hal and Kate, I think what the show really does very cleverly and very well, they show a parallel between diplomacy or diplomatic relationships between states and between spouses. So, and sometimes I think that they even show that the marital relationship requires a higher skill of diplomacy than the international relationship. So what from that relationship, on-screen relationship between Kate and Hal, did you recognize, or was there anything that you recognized from that relationship in your life?
I'll bring up the scene when Kate pulls Hal out of a meeting with the Chinese prime minister, and he's very unhappy about that. And she throws something back at him about Taiwan and the monetary authority or something like that, because she obviously knows the issues just as well as he does, and she can have a spousal argument with him by having a political argument with him. That is entirely true.
You know what? Let's listen to the scene just to better understand what you're talking about.
Hello?
You okay?
Fine, you?
What happened?
Nothing. Listen, you're backing a pretty muscular plan for oil extraction in the North Sea.
What? I had visions of you with all your teeth knocked out and a mouthful of blood.
What?
I thought something had happened.
Why?
Arden!
I have my teeth.
Jesus.
I have been...
Trying to reach you.
Yeah, I heard.
Listen, you can walk back your aggressive support of fossil fuels next week.
Just get me past this cocktail party.
That's why I just walked out on the Chinese foreign minister?
Yeah.
I had brief remarks this morning with a conference of mayors. Hi, how you doing? God bless America. You know how many drafts it went through?
This doesn't need drafts.
You just put me out ahead of the White House.
On resource extraction. Now the president has to either distance herself from me, which she'll do by saying I'm a moron,
Or sanction the rape and pillage of maritime ecosystems in the North Sea.
you can't play the wife card every time your host country needs a favor.
My host country doesn't need a favor. Denmark needs a favor, and this isn't the wife card. This is the ambassador card. Next time, I'll call the president. She still takes my calls.
Perfect.
And by the way,
If you're in with the Chinese, how about you tell them the Hong Kong Monetary Authority's AI transaction monitoring isn't a menace, it's puppet theater. And if they can keep it in their pants for 5 straight minutes, it'll collapse under its own weight.
Our dinner conversations, or occasionally, we could be discussing something and get into, well, your analysis is biased in this way and obscures the fact that blah 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 blah, etc. Like that level of command of issues when you're both in that world, they're at your fingertips. They're subject of your conversation. You do not leave the job at the job. You're 24/7. You wake up in the middle of the night and go, oh, I think I know what to do in order to incentivize such and such government to do this and that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that element of their marital life playing out through the politics and finding expression in the content of the politics, I think that's dead on. I think I guess I would say two things that are unfamiliar to us that we would have to distance ourselves from Kate and Hal is, number one, we have a great marriage. We are each other's best friends. And I mean, we never fight. We, occasionally one of us irritates the other. And, I mean, that's inevitable when you have two adult humans in the same space all the time. But generally speaking, we don't have anything like the degree of strife that they have in their marriage. And then the second thing is, and this gets to a dynamic of the show that I think is challenging for the show to pull off, and I'm not sure that the show quite does it. I think that the show they kind of wanted to have it both ways, by which I mean they wanted to do kind of a deep dive into everyday embassy life, but they also wanted the glamour of very high level politics.
Yeah.
And those are two very different things, right?
I remember very distinctly us talking about it while you still you still both were in Lithuania. And Nina, I think, said, because she knew that I wrote for television and made television. And she said, well, Aiste, you should do, a show maybe about, foreign service. And I said, well, because we worked on so many projects together and I've seen, the backstage. I was like, I'm not sure it's going to make for a very exciting television, and we all laughed about it. And then, all those years later, I'm like, The Diplomat, how the hell are they gonna pull it off? How the hell are they gonna make it interesting? And they did make an interesting show, I think, and you can share your opinions. But as you said, they just had to embellish the reality.
Yes.
So
some sacrifices were made in the process of making the show. One is this: they had to agree with Sean. They set themselves a very thin sort of line to walk with this high level political axis. And as we discussed, the way they did it, it's not clear kind of where Hal comes from. He looks like maybe he's from a political world, political appointee, because otherwise the very premise of the show that the White House would be looking for a vice presidential political candidate inside the Foreign Service is very difficult to accept.
Yeah, it's comical. It's hilarious, in fact. And even further than that, like the idea that you have to accept a patently false premise in order to get into the show, which is that a career Foreign Service officer like Kate would be appointed the ambassador to Afghanistan, as she originally was in the first season. And then she was sort of pulled from that and appointed to London. Never in a million years, because London and Paris are the two top prizes for donors to presidential campaigns. And that's who gets appointed to be ambassador to London and ambassador to Paris. It's that simple.
And given the importance of Kabul at the time, that's probably also a political appointee.
Yes.
That's just how the U.S. administration, the U.S. government works. Yeah. Fully a third of our ambassadors to all the, places whose names you would recognize immediately are political appointees.
Yeah.
And what is a political appointee in rather than
a career
diplomat?
foreign service? This is a person who is typically it's a donor to the presidential campaign, or it could be somebody that the president trusts specifically for whatever reason. The president has the power to choose his ambassadors.
It's basically somebody who has an independent relationship to the president or to the administration, and has not worked in the foreign service before. So good examples. John Huntsman was the governor of Utah at one point, and then he was, I believe President Bush appointed him ambassador to Singapore, and then President Obama appointed him as ambassador to China, and then President Trump appointed him as ambassador to Russia, and
then he went back to his life in Utah.
And he was just a billionaire, businessman, and then became governor of Utah, and he had nothing to do with the Foreign Service or the State Department until he was appointed as an ambassador, because he had this independent political life and knew, presidents basically by first name.
Right. Okay, so this show is giving a little bit of an American dream vibe, that anyone in the foreign service can become vice president and have this huge influence over, transatlantic politics or whatnot. Well, that's how you make interesting television, I suppose,
Yeah.
We touched upon this a little bit about the role of spouses, but I think this is another dimension of the show that I wanted to talk about, and that is one of the ways that the show makes it interesting is it has Kate doing what my shorthand for it is men's work, right? So Kate is at this high level of access. She deals with weaponry. She deals with submarines and drones. And, the show begins with a whole bunch of hardware blowing up in a distant location, which is very much men's work, both hardware and blowing it up. And so in the interest... And we see that in the scene where she becomes the second lady and the chief of staff to the vice president, Nora, suggests that she take on the Museum of American Diplomacy, which is very much what we would call women's work, which is taking care of appearing pretty, taking care that the curtains are ironed and wrinkleless, et cetera, presenting a certain face to the world, breaking up fights. And in fact, I think it's a little bit ironic when Kate as an ambassador hosts the lunch that is ostensibly about bird watching, and we're all like, how did Kate get into bird watching? And it turns out that's not what it is at all. She's doing this man's work. So in order to make that happen, again, I think some sacrifices were made in terms of narrowing the focus, the lens of the show. One is, as you pointed out, we don't see anybody's spouses, and we don't see that side of life that is, and Kate as an ambassador also probably has to go to like the board meetings for the school for the kids of the American diplomats in London. And, we don't see that. But we also don't see people who normally do that work, which is the National Security Advisor. Apparently, there's no National Security Council in the show, in this world. Doesn't exist. The U.S. military doesn't seem to be present, other than off screen, they sent a submarine and they did something, right? But there is no military to military relationship, which was something that also got a lot of comments from us in the first season. We're like, wait a minute, where's the such and such? Where's the defense attaché? This isn't entirely.
Yeah, the two or three big characters who are missing are the National Security Advisor, who is in fact the president's chief foreign policy advisor, the Secretary of State. If the Secretary of State happens to have a particularly close relationship with the president, he or she might be a valuable voice in the cabinet on foreign policy. But every president, really since Nixon appointed Henry Kissinger to be his national security advisor, has essentially ignored the State Department, with some exceptions. And currently we see something that I don't believe we've seen since the Nixon administration, when Henry Kissinger was both the national security advisor and the Secretary of State. We see right now Marco Rubio is the Secretary of State and the national security advisor. So that's an unusual thing. So that character is missing from the show. Another character that is missing from the show is the Secretary of Defense. I believe a Secretary of Defense gets mentioned once or twice, is sort of in passing, but that's a major player. And under the Secretary of Defense is the chair of the Joint Chiefs. So I'm getting a little bit into the weeds with that, but it would be like the Chief of the General Staff of European armies. And then the Defense Attaché at Embassy London. The Defense Attaché at Embassy London would be a crucial part of the ambassador's team, a huge part of the ambassador's team. And that's probably the one character that I would be curious to know why they didn't decide to write that character. Because that's the one that I think could most easily have been integrated into the show.
All of which is to say, it's just interesting to observe, and it would be interesting to hear what you have to say as a writer for TV, what kind of choices got made in the process of dramatizing the story.
I think it's very, very interesting, and fascinating listening to you and how you dissect the story. Because, for someone as an outsider, you could totally believe in that world. And I think that's one of the reasons why why the creators decided to omit certain characters. And because they really wanted to make a point of men's work and women's work and gender equality in the foreign service and the diplomatic service. We're going to come to that very, very quickly because I have another exciting excerpt for you to listen to. But so they probably thought, okay, so we have a theme, like every show has a theme. So if we as creators chose this theme, woman versus a politician, this internal struggle between me as a woman and what a society expects from me as a woman, and me as a politician or a foreign service officer and what a society expects me as a foreign service officer. So if we stick with that theme, then we get rid of everything that is not essential to that theme. So it's easier for the audience to believe in a world without certain characters that we don't even know that they exist, because, if we've never worked in foreign service, than to look at unbelievable characters. Because if it's difficult to integrate them, then we look at them and be like, who is this guy? Why is he talking? Like, why is he always undermining the ambassador? I don't like this guy. And then, you have the major military guy as a bad guy. You don't want that. And that creates all sorts of problems, in the writers' rooms. If it's too difficult, let's not make our lives too complicated for ourselves. Let's get rid of the characters that do not serve our theme.
I don't begrudge the writers for getting rid of certain characters. You have to. I understand. As a writer myself, I understand narrowing the lens to something that the audience can sort of take in. It's too much to represent the entire bureaucracy of the United States, in an hour episode each, week or whatever it is, So that makes sense.
Yeah. So now, since we're on the gender balance topic, so let's listen to another excerpt, very short. And that's actually at the very top of season 3. Kate is the U.S. ambassador in the UK, and she's hosting the vice president of the United States. And while she's doing that, the president of the United States dies. We're going to not mention why. Let the audience watch for themselves. But what happens when the president dies? The VP becomes automatically the president. So the vice president has to be sworn in London as soon as possible. And when she becomes president, her husband is flown in from Washington to London, and he's met by Hal Weiler. And let's listen to their first dialogue. Okay.
Hal Weiler, ambassador's wife.
Todd Penn, first lady.
They put her in the ambassador's office. Sit in here.
Hal.
So I'll show you the corner of the office where the husband sits and tries not to look diminished.
Okay, Sean, you're laughing. Why do you find it funny?
I actually think that the show handled this dynamic of the powerful or accomplished men sort of playing a secondary role for a time pretty well. I think the egos of the two men are large egos. They think, they have a lot of confidence. But they also are, at least Hal, I think he was genuine all along through the first, in the earlier part of the show. I think he was genuine all along in his desire for Kate to excel and succeed. And I think the show goes out of its way to make that point. I mean, they really reinforce over and over how, even though their relationship is very, very rocky and difficult, in part because of the type of personality that he has, he nevertheless genuinely cares about her career and her well-being and those kinds of things. But I think it's worth pointing out at this point that the show's main writer, Deborah Kahn, she apparently based Hal's character on a real person, the U.S. diplomat Richard Holbrooke, who was one of the chief negotiators of in the Balkan Wars in the mid-90s, and was a notoriously sort of big personality in Washington for many, many years during the Clinton era, especially, and then came back under President Obama to be special envoy to Afghanistan. I do have to say that the writers got a certain kind of diplomatic personality exactly right in Hal. This kind of hyper extroverted, hyper competent, hyper confident male who is nevertheless respectful of female colleagues, including his own wife, and not a sort of toxic alpha male, just this extraordinarily curious, outgoing. And we see it. Maybe one of the perfect scenes in the show where it's demonstrated is when Grace Penn is talking to President Rayburn's widow on the phone in the ambassador's office in London. And the blinds to the windows of the office are open, and the whole office is sort of staring at now President Penn, and everybody's like, "Gosh, we should really close the blinds to give her some privacy." And they're sort of deciding who's going to go in, and Hal just cuts right through it all and just walks in, closes the blinds, and walks back out again. Right? That's a perfect embodiment of a certain kind of extremely confident and well-meaning character who nevertheless, because of their confidence and because of their desire to do so much, can do extraordinary damage.
Yeah.
Right? And this is what Kate is dealing with, and it's what she ultimately can't deal with in her life. And she can't deal with having this man in her life who just brings so much energy and so many ideas. And that kind of personality is a personality that you will see in ambassadors, both career foreign service and political appointees, over and over and over again.
And even in the scene that we listen to, we hear Kate actually talk, but it's just like this very, very short, how, but he doesn't listen, because he's already in conversation, making his joke and pay attention to what she's trying to do, which basically kind of stop him because it's not his place to escort the first gentleman to his wife.
Yeah. Of course. I think the most illustrative line that Kate has in that episode, at some point she turns at Hal and she goes, "Can I just not think about you for a minute?" Because that's the invisible work that she's doing all the time, is thinking, trying to outthink and contain Hal, who means well, but it is really, that's the woman's work, right? You're trying to manage this guy who is an asset, but a very specific kind of asset. And she says that throughout the show. And I think it's eventually at the very end of season 3, no spoilers, but there is a scene where she and Todd, the president's husband, are watching the president and Hal talk to each other kind of outside of earshot. They can't tell what's going on. And both of them have their own misgivings about what is going on. Todd's is tinted with jealousy, and I think it's interesting that both men are portrayed as having sexually tinted jealousy. And Kate's at that point is just like, oh my God, what am I going to have to deal with? Like, he's scheming something and this is not going to go well. But of course, the president loves it because now she has this partner.
She has this asset.
She has this asset. She has Hal that she doesn't have to think for. Like she's chosen him, and she's now has Hal at her side.
This scene that we just listened to, it's supposed to be comical, right? So, hello, ambassador's wife, first lady, even they both men. But what's kind of bothering me or not sitting with me very well is that they both use female attributes or female nouns as synonyms to powerless. First wife, subordinate to president, not as important as the president. I mean, first lady or ambassador's wife, not as important as the ambassador. And then that raises the question of Grace Penn as the president too. Because the only way a woman can become a president is if a man dies. So the man died, she became president. And even then she says like, oh, I'm just here to carry out President Rainbird's legacy. I don't have any agenda of my own. I'm here just to continue the work that President Rainbird started. Then my question is that the only way she can seem credible to the nation, saying, oh, I'm just going to do what the man thought of, oh, no, God forbid I have ideas of my own, This scene, like, to me, it's a very short scene, but it brings up so many questions. How do you feel watching that scene or listening to that scene?
I think actually it was well done with Grace Penn stepping up into the president's role and beginning with, I'm here to uphold the legacy. Yes, it is more acceptable. It is more palatable to say, I'm here to do woman's work, which is continue the housekeeping. But I also think later in the show, there is a scene where somebody says to her, like, we need a president. I think it's Kate. We need a president, not a...
Oh, no, I think it's her chief of staff.
No, yeah, step up, essentially. Like, we need a president who makes independent decisions, not a tribute act. Yeah. I think it's also... I'm trying to picture, as you were talking about it, I'm picturing a different vice president in that situation, male or female. And I think that's a very natural kind of first message immediately after a constitutional crisis happens. Nobody wants to hear from the vice president because people still think of them as the vice president. It takes time to become the leader as the president or the president as the leader. And so I think that's a very natural message to begin with and say, like, I'm just here to carry out the legacy, right? I'm the loyal partner to the president, has been and will be, right? And then you move on and you become your own president and you build your own presidency and you get your own VP, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Sean has a better story about women in American politics.
I think there's a strain of conservatism in the United States that continues to fetishize historical women's reproductive roles in this way that is incompatible with a vision of a woman being commander-in-chief of the United States military.
Okay.
And that strain of conservatism is just, for whatever reason, it's just so much stronger in the United States than it is in Europe. I continue to think we're sadly too far away from the United States electing a woman as the president.
Do you think for the American audiences that makes season 3 maybe far-fetched?
I'm fascinated by the choices that the showrunners made to go back to the West Wing cast and pull actors from that show. The West Wing has a very specific place in American pop culture.
Yeah.
Whether you watched it live when it was coming out or you had come to it later,
Yep.
That one has the glow of the American dream. And so I think it is very intentional to pick
Allison Janney.
Thank you. From that cast where she was playing the press secretary and somebody who's very, very key to the White House operation. And somebody that the audiences essentially have this kind of perhaps vague but strong memory of seeing in that position and associated with the White House, and picking her and making her this character who is a vice president who becomes the president. I think that's a very intentional choice. I certainly appreciated that. I'm like, oh, of course I want to see CJ, right, from the West Wing, that's the name of the character, succeed and come up and sort of be associated, continue to be associated with that environment, with that situation. Now, that also tells us that perhaps a different actor in that role would not be as credible.
Right.
So who else could it be? And that gets back to this sort of collective imaginary signaling that the show is engaged in.
I guess I also am thinking, still deep in the Biden administration, I think it would have landed very differently right now. Putting a female president on screen feels like a statement of protest.
Right.
And so I think that's a dynamic that I think is at play as well.
And there is an element of, sometimes things just make for better writing. There's also like a female white vice president that becomes president is more interesting because, it hasn't happened yet. And maybe there is more drama here than a male vice president that becomes president. I'm sure,
Right.
A competent writer can make great work with either one of those, but, maybe I think there is a level of just creative choice here for what makes better drama.
Yeah, and also unpredictability. You have to surprise your audiences. If you're like, oh, there's another dude that came into the office, you're like, okay, well, oh yeah, fine. Maybe I'll skip season 3. I heard this new show came out, so I'm going to watch that. And here it's like, oh, okay, so I don't know. As Nina, you pointed out, I don't know what's going to happen because that never happened in real life. Oh, so I'm very interested in this new reality that they're trying to create here. Let me check it out. So yeah, that is very important when you write a show, especially if it's in season 3, then you're like, so what can we do to surprise our audiences? What can we do to make them stick around and keep watching? Yeah, it's really great, because in my introduction, I didn't mention that you both are writers, literally translators in Nina's case. So it's really nice that it came up and that I think that makes this conversation about TV and diplomacy and foreign service in equal measures. So, I think that's really great. But before we wrap up, was there any moment in the show, or maybe more than one, where you're like, oh, somebody actually got it, you as diplomats, as former foreign service officers, oh my God, they got it. It's really, that's really us. That's really our reality.
Yes. And it was, and tellingly, I think, for our experience, it had nothing to do with Hal or Kate or the president or anybody. Yeah. It was when they were going to swear in the new president.
Yes.
And they located a judge who was on vacation in Europe somewhere. And Stewart, the deputy chief of mission at the embassy, says to the staff assistant who is in charge of, sort of handling this judge and getting all the logistics taken care of, says that the kid says to Stewart, okay, we got everything taken care of. He's on his way, but he is on vacation and he doesn't travel with a robe. So he won't have a robe.
Yes.
And Stewart looks at him and he says, I swear to God, a church, a Harry Potter store, I don't care. Find a robe.
Yeah.
Right? That is dead on. That is exactly the kind of thing that you will end up doing as a foreign service officer, is procuring a robe for a judge from God knows where at the last minute.
Yep.
And also the Bible, the issue with the Bible. Where
the Bible, yes.
A book resembling a Bible.
Yes.
That's very, those were very good moments.
Yes.
And then I appreciated also, like, these are things that have nothing to do with anything, but at some point somebody goes into a meeting and somebody actually does collect their phones at the door and says, we have a Faraday bag. Very nerdy, but that means something specific. And actually, Sean is writing a piece right now where we just use the phrase, this is a Faraday cage, for the same kind of, it's a suppression of signaling from an environment to make it more secure. And we were like, Faraday bag! This is as both writers and nerds and foreign service officers were like, yes, finally somebody secured the phones. I can breathe easier about this scene. Nobody's going to be overheard. Okay, thank you, security. be maintained.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest flaws of the show is that everybody carries their phone everywhere. There are parts of embassies where you can carry your phone, but very few of the actual working areas that you have to leave your phone outside. And so and that most definitely includes the ambassador's office, and the front office. And so the fact that Kate has her phone in her own office is crazy.
I think that's become a cinematic convention.
Yeah.
The same goes for slow horses, for example, like phones in the environments where they absolutely would not be allowed, or even if they were allowed, they wouldn't be working.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
So that's just something that you have to do, I think, to make television and have cameras show things happening, not people running in and out doors to find their phone, but
or trying to send, I don't know, a signal, like a fire signal or something. Because
like flashlight at the window kind of thing. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Because when we write dramas, it's all about human connections, about people either making a connection or failing to make a connection. And then if you take all the means of making connections, then it becomes very difficult to write. What about those big political issues that they're trying to solve? How plausible does that look through your eyes?
On that topic, on that question, Aiste, I would say actually one of the things that struck me about the show is that they seemed early on in the show, like back in season 1, to be very focused on the minutia, the really small details of the geopolitics. I mean, there was a lot of long blocks of dialogue about, the very specific politics of the Middle East and stuff like that. Stuff that, like, as a non-Middle East expert, like, I couldn't even follow. And I thought, well, this is really interesting that they're doing that. But then they really seemed, especially in season 3, to have transitioned more to the relationship issues between the characters. And yes, there's the whole spat between the US and the UK and the Russian submarine, but that's more just like the framework within which the relationships are playing out.
I noticed that too, because they were very detail oriented in season 1, and then in season 3, like almost anything, like we're just like phrases thrown out into the air, and like Ukraine, Russia, radioactive submarine. You could rearrange these words. It didn't really matter. So it's interesting. In the introduction to this conversation, I mentioned that the show was nominated for 55 awards in total, but it won very few. And it didn't win any big ones like the Golden Globes or Primetime Emmys. Even though, from our discussion, it might seem that it's very relevant and it has great acting. Yes. It touches upon very current issues, very recognizable issues. But this, for example, this year, it was nominated for the best drama for a Golden Globe, and then The Pit took the award, even though The Pit just tells a story of a day in the ER. Of course, there are so many factors that go into the judging process, but one of them is definitely originality and relevance. Well, what shortcomings can you find in the show?
An interesting question.
I think they set themselves a very ambitious task. They tried to capture so much. It's very dangerous to say to an audience, here, please judge us on our accuracy, right? Because don't get me wrong, they get a lot of stuff very right. But if you're asking me, if you come to me kind of more like The West Wing did and said, hey, some of this stuff isn't going to be exactly true to life, but, don't worry about that stuff. What we really want you to pay attention to is, the big emotional story arcs, right? That's a very different approach than what The Diplomat has said. The Diplomat has said to us, I felt as a viewer, they said, we're going to make something that part of the interest of it is going to be how true to life it is. And we really want to get down to the very small details of these characters' lives in this world of both day-to-day diplomacy and high politics. And when you do that, you're going to get a lot of stuff right, but you're bound to get a lot of stuff wrong. And I do think from our perspective, and that may not be what, the judges who are handing out the awards are thinking, but from my perspective, I would have been happier if they'd not tried so hard to capture real life elements. Because then they tell me as an audience member, you don't have to worry about that stuff. And so I would have been happier watching the show in that mode than in, well, let's see if they got everything right mode. Was this show supposed to be, quote unquote, about Kate? If it was, then maybe it has missed the mark a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it's really an open question because I was trying to figure it out by myself because it's a good show. It's not a bad show, and it gets nominated for all the highest awards in the industry, but it never wins. But I think what you're saying, and I tend to kind of have the same feeling, is that it's trying to do too much. And in television, that's not always a good thing. I mean, in a documentary, yes, you can show a marital dynamics in the context of diplomacy and also explain a little bit of the political context and do all this. But in a TV drama, in a TV series, I think if you stick with one theme, you're winning here because there's a really very limited amount of time and you have to kind of commit to maybe doing just one thing. Like, the Pit says, we're just going to show the condition of those doctors and those super dire conditions. And that's all we care. We care about the doctors. We don't care about the patients, honestly. We don't care about the operations. We don't care about the equipment there. But we really care about those doctors there. How are they going to survive this long day? And that's why the show is so powerful. Yeah, but The Diplomat is like when I ask myself, so who do I really care about in the show? I don't know.
Yeah.
I very much appreciate the point you're bringing up about sort of difference between documentary and television and how The Pit accomplishes what it does. There's difficulty in trying to write a show about current affairs.
True.
Because you're always going to be, the length of the production being what it is, you're always going to be behind. But I was thinking about, as you were talking about The Pit and what it does, I was thinking about also other shows by Aaron Sorkin, in addition to West Wing, Sports Night, and Newsroom.
The Newsroom.
The Newsroom and Sports Night. They all dealt with current issues, like sort of social issues, cultural issues, but in a setting that is not necessarily driven, or in a setup that's not driven by those issues, right? The issues are kind of repeatable, like they're recyclable.
Yeah.
It's women and leadership, or domestic politics in the United States, sort of like environmental concerns versus energy independence. Like these are recyclable things, right? And you can plug them in or take them out or replace them, which I think this show, The Diplomat, has also tried to do, like, okay, Russian submarines in places, but like you need to spend more time with that, make that the thing. But they're trying to demonstrate the very true nature of diplomacy and foreign policy, where there's always another crisis. There's always something new. But that's the difficulty. I think that maybe that to the judges who maybe want more relevance to what's currently happening, okay, that's never going to be the case.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to nail it 100%. Like they've had to not write about Ukraine because when they started writing the show, that wasn't the thing.
Yeah.
And then it happened, and then you just kind of have to decide, like, okay, we're not going to touch that because we're not going to get it right. Yeah.
And I think maybe in season 1, they did it a little bit better than in season 3. It's just showing that diplomacy, true diplomacy, is in small things. If you get the details right, then the big things kind of, they're so much easier to sort.
And unfortunately for TV, not only is it in details, it also takes forever.
Yes.
It takes very long time. Things don't get...
because the bureaucracy moves at its own pace. Yes, presidents can set agendas. Yes, high-ranking officials can say, this is my priority. I need to know this, or I need to have this now on certain things. But in large part, it takes as long as it takes. And so, yeah, Nina's very right that things do not happen at the speed of television. That is for sure.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you both for joining me today and for sharing your personal experience, your professional experience, your creative expertise with us. And for our listeners, just a quick reminder that all 3 seasons of The Diplomat are available on Netflix. If our discussion inspired you, check it out.